Maria Rodriguez stepped off the tour bus at Buckingham Palace, her camera already clicking away at the magnificent gates. The 28-year-old teacher from Barcelona had saved for 3 years to make this dream trip to London happen. She clutched her guidebook tightly, filled with colorful sticky notes marking all the places she wanted to visit during her week-long vacation. The summer morning was perfect, with golden sunlight streaming through the trees and casting beautiful shadows across the palace grounds. Maria had arrived early, hoping to avoid the usual crowds of tourists that would flood the area later in the day. She wanted to capture the perfect photographs to show her students back home, especially pictures of the famous royal guards that everyone talked about. As she walked closer to the palace entrance, Maria noticed a tall figure standing perfectly still near the main gate. The royal guard stood like a statue, wearing the iconic red uniform and the enormous black bearskin hat that made him appear even taller than his already impressive height. His face showed no expression whatsoever, and he stared straight ahead, as if nothing in the world could disturb his concentration. Maria had read about these guards in her guidebook. She knew they were real soldiers, not just performers for tourists. They had important jobs protecting the royal family and couldn't be distracted while on duty. The book warned visitors to respect their space and not try to make them laugh or react. But seeing one in person was completely different from reading about them. She started taking pictures from a respectful distance, amazed by how the guard remained completely motionless. His discipline was incredible. Even when other tourists walked by and made silly faces or loud noises, he didn't even blink. Maria found herself getting more and more curious about what it would take to make him move or show any kind of reaction. After taking dozens of photos, Maria noticed that most tourists were keeping their distance and just snapping pictures like she was doing. But she had traveled so far to be here, and this might be her only chance to see a royal guard up close. She thought about her students back in Barcelona, who would be so excited to hear about her adventure. Wouldn't it be amazing if she had a really special story to tell them? Maria started walking slowly toward the guard, her heart beating faster with each step. She wasn't planning anything disrespectful, but she wanted to get a closer look at his uniform and maybe take a better photograph. As she got nearer, she could see the incredible detail in his red jacket with its shiny gold buttons and perfect stitching. Everything about his appearance was absolutely flawless. The guard's face remained completely blank, showing no sign that he had noticed her approaching. Maria wondered what he was thinking about as he stood there so perfectly still. Did he get tired? Was it boring to stand in one place for so long? Did he notice all the tourists staring at him and taking pictures? Standing just a few feet away from him now, Maria felt a sudden wave of emotion. Here was this young man, probably not much older than she was, doing his duty so seriously and professionally. He reminded her of some of her hardest-working students, the ones who always tried their best no matter what. Something about his dedication touched her heart. Without really thinking about what she was doing, Maria felt an overwhelming urge to show her appreciation for his service. In her culture, hugging someone was a natural way to show respect and gratitude. She knew it might not be appropriate, but the feeling was so strong that she started to step forward, her arms beginning to open slightly. The moment seemed to freeze in time as Maria realized what she was about to do. Other tourists nearby had stopped what they were doing and were now watching her with curious expressions. Some had their cameras ready, sensing that something interesting was about to happen. The guard continued staring straight ahead, but there seemed to be a subtle change in the air around them. Maria's heart pounded as she found herself standing directly in front of the royal guard, close enough to see the individual threads in his red uniform. She could hear her own breathing and became aware that several other tourists had stopped their sightseeing to watch what was happening. Some were whispering to each other in different languages, pointing in her direction. The guard's eyes remained fixed on a point somewhere far beyond her head. But Maria noticed something that made her pause. There was the slightest tension around. his eyes so subtle that most people would miss it completely. It was as if he was aware of her presence, but was fighting every instinct to acknowledge it. His training and discipline were clearly being tested. Before Maria could fully process what she was doing, her arms moved forward and she wrapped them gently around the guard's waist. The hug lasted only about 3 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. She could feel the stiff fabric of his uniform and the warmth of another human being beneath all that formal clothing. For just a moment, she forgot about the cameras, the watching crowd, and the fact that this was probably against every rule in the book. The reaction from the other tourists was immediate and dramatic. Several people gasped audibly, while others started taking pictures and videos as quickly as possible. A woman from Germany whispered loudly to her husband that the Spanish tourist was going to get arrested. An elderly British couple looked absolutely scandalized, shaking their heads and muttering about proper behavior and respect for traditions. But the most surprising reaction came from the guard himself. Instead of remaining perfectly still or calling for backup, something unexpected happened. For just the briefest moment, barely noticeable to anyone who wasn't paying close attention, the corner of his mouth twitched slightly. It wasn't quite a smile, but it wasn't the stone-faced expression he had maintained all morning either. Maria stepped back immediately, her face turning red as she realized what she had just done. She started apologizing in a mixture of Spanish and broken English, her words tumbling out in a confused rush. She kept saying she was sorry, that she didn't mean any disrespect, that she just wanted to thank him for his service. Her hands were shaking as she clutched her camera, wondering if she was about to be arrested by palace security. The guard continued looking straight ahead, but there was definitely something different about his posture now. It was as if Maria's unexpected gesture had reminded him that underneath his formal role he was still a human being. The rigid military bearing was still there, but there seemed to be just a tiny bit more life in his stance. Other tourists began approaching slowly, curious to see what would happen next. A teenage boy from Australia asked his father if the guard was going to move or speak. A group of Japanese visitors started taking more pictures, fascinated by this unusual interaction they had never seen before during their travels. An older British tourist, who had been watching from nearby, walked over to Maria with a concerned expression. He explained gently that while her intentions were clearly good, the royal guards were not supposed to be touched or distracted while on duty. He told her about the strict protocols and traditions that governed their behavior, and how important their job was for the safety and security of the royal family. Maria listened carefully, feeling more embarrassed with each passing moment. She had read about these rules in her guidebook, but somehow in the excitement of the moment, she had forgotten everything. She looked back at the guard, who was still maintaining his professional stance, and felt terrible that she might have put him in a difficult position with his superiors. Just as Maria was preparing to walk away and continue her tour, something happened that no one expected. The guard, still looking straight ahead and maintaining his formal posture, did something that would be talked about by witnesses for months afterward. The small change in his demeanor was about to become something much more significant. What happened next would become one of those magical moments that people remember forever. The royal guard, still maintaining his perfect military posture and staring straight ahead, began to speak. His voice was quiet, but clear enough for Maria and the nearby tourists to hear every word. "Thank you for your kindness, miss," he said in a crisp British accent, never moving his head or changing his gaze. "Your gesture meant more than you know." The crowd of tourists erupted in surprised murmurs and excited chatter. Cell phones and cameras came out immediately as everyone tried to capture this extraordinary moment. In all their years of visiting London, none of these travelers had ever heard a royal guard speak while on duty, let alone acknowledge a tourist's interaction in such a personal way. Maria stood frozen in amazement, tears welling up in her eyes. She had expected to be scolded or ignored, but instead received this gracious acknowledgement. The guard's words were spoken with such genuine warmth that it was clear he truly appreciated her spontaneous gesture, even though it had gone against all the usual protocols. The British tourist who had been explaining the rules to Maria looked completely stunned. He had lived in London his entire life and had never witnessed anything like this. He began telling the other tourists that this was absolutely unprecedented, that royal guards simply did not break their silence during their duties, no matter what happened around them. A family from Canada who had been watching the entire interaction started clapping softly. Their applause was quickly joined by other tourists, creating a gentle wave of appreciation that spread throughout the small crowd. It wasn't loud or disruptive, but rather a quiet celebration of the unexpected human connection they had all witnessed. The guard continued standing perfectly still, but there was now an unmistakable sense of warmth radiating from him. While he maintained every aspect of his professional bearing, something fundamental had shifted. The rigid barrier between duty and humanity had been gently crossed, creating a moment of genuine connection that transcended cultural differences and formal protocols. Maria wiped away a tear and whispered her own thank you, even though she wasn't sure if he could hear her. She felt overwhelmed by the kindness in his response and the realization that her impulsive hug had been received with such grace and understanding. This was turning into the most meaningful experience of her entire trip to London. Word of the unusual interaction began spreading quickly among the tourists in the area. People who had been visiting other parts of the palace grounds started walking over to see what was causing all the excitement. A tour guide leading a group of American visitors heard about the incident and brought her entire group to witness what she called a once-in-a-lifetime moment. As the crowd grew larger, Maria began to worry that she might have caused problems for the guard. She knew that his superiors might not appreciate this break from standard protocol, even though it had been handled with such dignity and professionalism. She started to step away, hoping to reduce the attention and allow things to return to normal. But the guard wasn't finished. Still maintaining his perfect posture and forward gaze, he spoke once more, his words carrying across the morning air with remarkable clarity. What he said next would ensure that this encounter would be remembered and retold for years to come, becoming the kind of story that people share to remind others about the power of simple human kindness. The anticipation in the crowd was almost tangible as everyone waited to hear what this remarkable young soldier would say. Even the most seasoned travelers among them sensed that they were witnessing something truly special, a moment that would become part of their own travel stories for the rest of their lives. The Royal Guard's second statement was even more unexpected than his first. Still looking straight ahead with perfect military discipline, he continued speaking in his clear, measured voice that somehow managed to be both professional and deeply personal. "I've been standing here for 2 hours this morning," he said, "and you're the first person to see me as more than just a tourist attraction. That hug reminded me why I'm proud to serve." The impact of his words rippled through the growing crowd like a gentle wave. Several people openly wiped tears from their eyes, moved by the guard's honest admission about how it felt to be treated more like a living statue than a human being. Maria covered her mouth with both hands, overwhelmed by the profound effect her simple gesture had created. An elderly woman from Ireland stepped forward and spoke to the crowd in a voice full of emotion. She explained that her grandson was serving in the military overseas, and seeing this interaction reminded her of how much these young soldiers sacrificed to serve their countries. Her words resonated with other visitors who had family members in the armed forces around the world. The guard's commanding officer, who had been observing from a distance, began walking toward the scene. Many tourists tensed up, expecting him to reprimand the guard for breaking protocol. But as he approached, his expression was thoughtful rather than angry. He had heard every word of the exchange and seemed to be processing the unusual situation carefully. Maria noticed the approaching officer and immediately felt responsible for any trouble the kind guard might face. She stepped toward the officer, prepared to explain that the guard had done nothing wrong and had handled her inappropriate behavior with remarkable grace and professionalism. Her mind raced as she tried to find the right English words to defend him. Before Maria could speak, something remarkable happened. The commanding officer stopped a respectful distance away and simply observed the scene. Instead of interrupting or calling the guard to attention, he seemed to understand that something significant was taking place. His experienced eyes took in the moved faces of the tourists and the dignified bearing of his subordinate. The guard, sensing his officer's presence without looking, spoke once more. This time his words were directed toward his superior, though he maintained his forward gaze and formal posture throughout. "Sir, this visitor showed me kindness that reminded me of the honor in our service," he stated clearly. "I felt it appropriate to acknowledge her respect for our duties." The commanding officer nodded slowly, his face showing a mixture of professional assessment and human understanding. After a moment of consideration, he made a decision that surprised everyone present, including the guard himself. Rather than ending the interaction, he chose to let this extraordinary moment continue to unfold naturally. A professional photographer who happened to be in the area taking pictures for a travel magazine had captured the entire sequence of events. She realized she had documented something truly special and began approaching various tourists to get their reactions and learn more about what had happened. The story was already starting to take on a life of its own. Young children in the crowd seemed particularly affected by what they were witnessing. A little girl from France asked her mother why everyone was crying happy tears. A boy from Australia told his father that he wanted to hug all the soldiers he met to thank them for protecting people. The innocence of their responses highlighted the pure emotional truth of the moment. Maria found herself at the center of an experience that had grown far beyond her simple impulse to show gratitude. She looked around at all the faces surrounding her, each person touched in their own way by this unexpected demonstration of human connection across cultural and professional boundaries. The morning had transformed from a routine tourist visit into something none of them would ever forget. The story was about to take another surprising turn, one that would ensure this encounter became something even more meaningful than anyone could have anticipated. The commanding officer stepped forward with a decision that would make this encounter legendary. Instead of restoring normal protocol, he addressed the gathered crowd with words that transformed the entire situation into something extraordinary. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced in his authoritative voice, "you have witnessed something quite remarkable today. This young soldier has demonstrated that duty and humanity can exist together with perfect harmony." His response to this visitor's gesture shows the very best of what our service represents. The crowd was amazed by this official endorsement of what had happened. Rather than being reprimanded, the guard was being publicly commended for his handling of the unusual situation. The officer's words carried weight and dignity, elevating the moment from a simple breach of protocol to a celebration of human connection and professional excellence. Maria felt her heart swell with pride, not for herself, but for the young guard who had turned her impulsive mistake into something beautiful. She realized that his gracious response had probably saved her from embarrassment and possibly even legal trouble, while also creating a moment of inspiration for everyone present. The photographer from the travel magazine approached the commanding officer and asked for permission to include the story in her upcoming article about London's attractions. She explained that this kind of authentic human moment was exactly what modern travelers were seeking, and that it showed the royal guards in a wonderfully positive light. After considering her request carefully, the officer agreed, with the condition that the guard's identity remain protected and that the story focus on the positive aspects of cultural exchange and mutual respect. He understood that this incident could actually enhance public appreciation for the royal guards, rather than undermining their reputation for discipline and professionalism. Word of the encounter began spreading beyond the immediate crowd. Other Tourists who heard about it started walking over to see the guard who had spoken to a visitor. Some hoped to witness another interaction, but most simply wanted to see this soldier who had shown such grace under unusual circumstances. The guard himself remained perfectly professional throughout all the attention. He continued his duties without any change in his bearing or focus, but there was an unmistakable sense that something positive had shifted in how he viewed his role. The reminder that people truly appreciated his service seemed to energize rather than distract him. A group of school children on a field trip arrived just as the crowd was beginning to thin out. Their teacher, who had heard about the incident from other tourists, used it as a perfect teaching moment about respect, kindness, and the importance of military service. The children listened with wide eyes as she explained what had happened. One brave little boy raised his hand and asked if he could thank the guard too. The teacher looked toward the commanding officer, who nodded his approval. The child stepped forward and simply said, "Thank you for keeping everyone safe, sir." The guard's slight nod in acknowledgement was barely perceptible, but it was enough to make the boy beam with pride. Maria realized that her simple hug had started something much bigger than she could have imagined. The encounter had become a bridge between different cultures, generations, and perspectives. People were connecting with each other and with the deeper meaning of service and sacrifice in ways that rarely happened in typical tourist interactions. As her scheduled tour time approached, Maria knew she needed to leave, but she felt changed by everything that had occurred. This wasn't just a tourist experience anymore. It had become a profound reminder about the power of human kindness and the unexpected connections that can happen when people see past roles and uniforms to recognize the person underneath. The guard, still maintaining his perfect posture and forward gaze, had one final surprise that would provide the perfect conclusion to this remarkable morning. His last words would ensure that everyone present would carry this memory with them forever, sharing it as a story about the magic that can happen when courage meets kindness in the most unexpected places. As Maria prepared to leave with her tour group, the Royal Guard spoke his final words of the morning, creating a conclusion that would be remembered and retold countless times in the years to come. "Miss," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the morning air. "When you return to Spain, please tell your students that kindness is a universal language and that their teacher taught a soldier something important about the true meaning of service today." These words created a moment of pure magic that seemed to suspend time itself. Maria burst into tears, not from sadness, but from being overwhelmed by the beauty and wisdom of his response. The crowd erupted in spontaneous applause that was both respectful and deeply moved. Even the commanding officer was visibly touched by his subordinate's eloquent conclusion to this extraordinary encounter. The travel magazine photographer captured the final moments as Maria, tears streaming down her face, placed her hand over her heart in a gesture of gratitude before walking away. The image would later become iconic, representing the power of simple human connection to transcend cultural differences and formal barriers. Other tourists began approaching Maria as she made her way back to her tour group. They thanked her for creating such a memorable experience and asked her to share her contact information so they could send her copies of the photos and videos they had taken. The Canadian family invited her to visit them if she ever came to North America, while the elderly Irish woman hugged her and said she reminded her of her own daughter. The guard's shift ended an hour later, and as he was replaced by another soldier, word of the morning's events had spread throughout the palace security team. His fellow guards greeted him with a mixture of good-natured teasing and genuine admiration for how he had handled such an unusual situation with grace and wisdom. Maria's tour guide, who had been searching for her when she missed the bus departure, found her surrounded by tourists eager to hear more about her experience. When Maria explained what had happened, the guide decided to adjust the day's schedule to allow time for the group to hear the full story. It became an unexpected highlight of their London adventure. The story began appearing on social media within hours, shared by dozens of tourists who had witnessed the encounter. The videos and photos went viral, not because of any drama or conflict, but because people around the world were hungry for genuine moments of human connection and kindness. Comments poured in from military families, teachers, travelers, and ordinary people who were inspired by what they had seen. Back in Barcelona, Maria's principal received several emails from strangers who had seen the story online and wanted to commend the school for having such a wonderful teacher. When Maria returned from her vacation, she found her classroom decorated with flags from different countries and messages from students about kindness and respect for service members. The commanding officer submitted a commendation for his guards' exemplary handling of the situation, noting that he had transformed a potential protocol violation into a powerful demonstration of the values their regiment represented. The young soldier received recognition that enhanced rather than damaged his military career. Months later, Maria received a letter forwarded through the British Embassy. It was from the Royal Guard, written during his off-duty time, thanking her again for reminding him why his service mattered. He had been accepted into officer training school and credited their encounter as one of the experiences that motivated him to pursue greater responsibility in his military career. The photographer's article was published in multiple magazines and websites around the world, always focusing on the positive message about cultural understanding and human decency. The story became a favorite among travel writers as an example of how authentic interactions could happen in the most formal settings when people approached each other with genuine respect and openness. Years later, Maria would still tell this story to her students as an example of how small acts of kindness could create ripple effects that touched many lives in unexpected ways. The Royal Guard, now an officer himself, would share the experience with new recruits as a reminder that their duty included being ambassadors of their country's values, even while maintaining the highest standards of military discipline. The encounter at Buckingham Palace became proof that beneath uniforms and roles, across cultural boundaries and language differences, human kindness could create moments of connection that last a lifetime. It showed that sometimes the most meaningful travel experiences happen not when we follow the rules perfectly, but when we follow our hearts with genuine respect and openness to others.